The transmission was unlike anything ever encountered. It did not come from a distant star or a hidden military outpost, but from the very edge of the solar system, a region so cold and dark that light itself seemed to slow down. The signal was clean, powerful, and unmistakably artificial. It was a greeting, a formal introduction from a species calling themselves the Apex. They were coming, they announced, to observe, to study, and to ensure that humanity posed no threat to the stability of the galactic community. Their words were diplomatic, but the underlying message was as cold as the void they traveled through. They were the judges, and humanity was on trial. The arrival of the Apex fleet was a spectacle that silenced the world. The ships were magnificent, kilometers-long constructs of polished obsidian and glowing blue energy channels, moving with a grace that defied their immense size. They were beautiful and terrifying, 艺术作品 of a technology so advanced it seemed like magic. They positioned themselves in a high orbit, a silent armada of 17 vessels, their presence a constant heavy shadow over every city on Earth. Smaller craft, sleek and swift like predatory fish, began to descend, scanning the planet, probing its defenses, analyzing its communications. The Apex were not hiding their scrutiny. They wanted humanity to know they were being judged. For weeks, the Apex observed. They did not interfere. They did not communicate further. They simply watched, their silent ships a constant reminder of the power hanging above. Global panic simmered just below the surface. Economies wavered, and a strange, tense quiet settled over the planet. Then, they made their move. The Apex had identified what they deemed the most representative vessel of humanity's spacefaring capability. It was not a warship, but an old Jovian mining hauler, the CM-88 Constance. It was a workhorse, a relic covered in the scars of 1,000 asteroid impacts, its hull a patchwork of welded repairs. It was slow, ungainly, and carried a crew of 42 miners and engineers, people more accustomed to handling drills and hauling ice than facing an alien armada. A single, massive Apex vessel, a command ship, detached from the fleet and began its descent. It was the largest of them all, a floating mountain of dark stone and blue fire. Its destination was clear. It was going to board the Constance. The world held its breath, watching through live feeds from orbital platforms. Military commanders scrambled, but everyone knew any human ship that got close would be vaporized in an instant. The Constance and its crew were alone. On board the mining hauler, Captain Elias Vance watched the alien colossus approach on his main viewer. He was a man carved from the same rugged material as his ship, his face a roadmap of laugh lines and deep space worries. His crew, a collection of roughnecks and deep-core specialists, stood frozen at their stations, their eyes wide. The Apex ship drew alongside, dwarfing the Constance like a whale beside a minnow. With a series of powerful magnetic clamps, it latched onto the human vessel's hull. A deep, resonant groan echoed through the Constance as its frame protested the forced connection. An airlock, perfectly circular and glowing with inner light, extended from the Apex ship and sealed itself against the Constance's main personnel lock. A hiss of equalizing pressure, and then the heavy manual wheel on the Constance's airlock began to turn on its own, its ancient gears grinding under an unseen force. The massive door swung open. Standing in the brilliant, sterile light of the connecting tunnel were 3 Apex. They were tall, easily 8 feet, with skin like polished slate and elongated, featureless heads that seemed to absorb the light around them. They wore simple, form-fitting suits of a material that shimmered like liquid mercury. They did not carry visible weapons. They did not need to. Their presence, their sheer, silent authority, was weapon enough. The lead Apex glided forward, its movements fluid and unsettlingly smooth, and stopped just inside the human vessel. It surveyed the cramped, grimy corridor, the exposed pipes, the flickering fluorescent lights, the smell of recycled air, machine oil, and old coffee. A faint, almost imperceptible tremor of what might have been disgust ran through its frame. "You are the captain of this vessel," it stated. Its voice was not a sound that traveled through the air, but a vibration that resonated directly inside the skulls of everyone present. It was cold, clinical, and devoid of any inflection. "I am Xylos, observer of the Apex Collective. By the authority vested in my kind as the arbiters of galactic order, this vessel and its crew are now subject to our inspection. You will comply fully and without resistance. Resistance is illogical and will be met with nullification." Captain Vance, his heart hammering against his ribs, stepped forward to face the being. He was a head shorter than the alien and felt like a primitive caveman staring at a god. "Observer Xylos," he said, his voice surprisingly steady, "a product of decades of dealing with exploding drills and faulty life support. Welcome aboard the Constance. We're a simple mining vessel. I'm not sure what there is to inspect." He offered a small, cautious nod. "Would you and your associates care to join us in the mess hall? We were just about to have the evening meal. It's not much, but it's warm." Xylos's featureless head tilted a fraction of a degree. The concept was so foreign, so utterly beneath the dignity of the collective, that its processing units struggled to categorize it. A meal? A social ritual? It was illogical. "We do not consume organic sustenance in your manner," it vibrated inside their minds. "We will observe. Lead us to your command center. We will begin our assessment there." Vance nodded, gesturing down the corridor. As they walked, the other two Apex followed in perfect, silent synchronization, their blank heads slowly turning, recording every detail, every rivet, every faded safety poster. They passed the open door to the mess hall, and the Apex paused for a microsecond. Inside, the off-duty crew sat hunched over their trays, pushing food around, their faces pale with fear. One of them, a young woman named Lena, looked up and accidentally made eye contact with the Apex. She flinched, her fork clattering onto her plate. The Apex's gaze lingered for a moment, analyzing her biological reaction. Fear. A predictable, low-order emotional response. It then turned its attention to the room itself. It was cluttered, messy. A half-finished card game was abandoned on a table. Someone had hung a string of colorful, blinking holiday lights around a bulkhead. A small potted plant sat on a shelf, struggling to survive under the weak artificial light. There was no order, no sterile efficiency, just a chaotic collection of personal effects and emotional clutter. It was inefficient. Finally, they reached the bridge. It was just as cluttered as the rest of the ship. Vance's chair was an old, spring-loaded relic held together with duct tape. Schematics and personal photos were taped to the consoles. A coffee mug with the words, "Best Captain Ever," sat on a ledge. Xylos stood in the center, its two companions flanking the door. It began its assessment, its internal sensors scanning every system, every piece of data, every communication log. It was a thorough, invasive, and silent process that lasted for over an hour. The crew stood by, tense and helpless. Finally, Xylos turned back to Vance. "Our preliminary assessment is complete. Your technology is primitive. Your vessel is inefficient and poorly maintained. Your species displays a high degree of emotional volatility and illogical behavior." It paused, letting the weight of its judgment sink in. "You are, however, not an immediate threat. You lack the capacity for it. We will transmit our findings to the collective. A final judgment on your species' status will be rendered." Vance just nodded slowly, his mind racing. He saw the way the Apex looked at his ship, at his crew, at everything. It wasn't just assessment, it was contempt. They saw the Constance not as a home, not as a vessel with a soul, but as a dirty, broken thing. An idea, a small, desperate seed of a plan began to form in his mind. They thought humanity was weak, chaotic, and illogical. Perhaps that very perception could be their greatest weapon. "Observer," Vance said, his voice a little stronger now. "You've seen our ship, our data, but you haven't truly experienced it. You've been observing us from the outside, through your scanners. To understand a species, you have to understand its heart. And the heart of this ship is its crew, its daily life. You said you were here to observe, so observe. Not just our machines, observe us. Xylos considered this. The request was unusual, but the captain was correct. Their directive was to observe and understand humanity. A purely technical analysis was perhaps incomplete. Your request is noted, Xylos vibrated. We will remain on board for a full cycle of your vessel's rotation to conduct further behavioral observations. The Apex agreed to stay, but their presence was a heavy blanket of dread. They did not sleep. They stood in the corners of rooms, their featureless heads tracking every movement, reading every conversation. They followed the crew to the mess hall for the next meal and stood silently, observing the ritual. The crew ate in near total silence, the clinking of spoons against bowls the only sound. The Apex noted the lack of conversation, the suppressed fear. It was a data point on emotional response under stress. Later, they observed the engineers in the engine room. The engineers, two burly men named Jared and Finn, were trying to fix a faulty coolant pump. They were swearing, arguing, and using tools in ways that were clearly not in the manual. Jared hit a pipe with a wrench in frustration, and the pump suddenly started working. They cheered, clapped each other on the back, and Jared kissed his wrench. The Apex recorded this. Illogical problem-solving, reliance on emotional outbursts and random chance. They followed Lena, the young woman from the mess hall, to the ship's tiny greenhouse where she tended to her struggling plants. She talked to them softly, encouraging them to grow. The Apex observed this illogical behavior. The plants had no auditory receptors. Communication with Flora was a waste of energy. Yet the woman's emotional state seemed to improve after the interaction. A bizarre, symbiotic emotional loop. The most confounding observations, however, came from the captain. He moved through the ship, not with the frantic fear of his crew, but with a quiet, determined calm. He checked on everyone. He put a hand on Jared's shoulder after the pump incident and told him, "Good job, son." He stopped by Lena's greenhouse and complimented her on a new leaf on her plant. He made bad jokes to the navigator to ease the tension. He was not just commanding a vessel, he was tending to his crew, calming them, holding them together. The Apex noted his behavior as a form of emotional management, a primitive but surprisingly effective technique for maintaining group cohesion under stress. It was, they concluded, a function of the alpha individual in a social hierarchy. As the ship's night cycle began and the crew retired to their quarters, the Apex remained in the corridor, their vigil unending. Captain Vance approached Xylos, holding two mismatched mugs. Steam rose from them. "Observer," he said softly, "I know you said you don't consume sustenance, but this is different. This is coffee. It's a ritual. It's part of who we are. Just hold it. Experience it." Xylos looked at the proffered mug. The liquid inside was dark and hot. Its sensors detected a complex mixture of organic compounds, some mildly stimulating to the human nervous system. The request was illogical, but the captain's persistence was a variable they had not yet fully analyzed. To further their understanding, Xylos reached out with a long-fingered hand and accepted the mug. The ceramic was warm. The warmth seeped into its cool skin, a novel and not unpleasant sensation. It held the mug, its featureless head staring into the dark liquid. It did not drink, but it held it. And for the first time since it had boarded, Xylos felt something it could not immediately categorize. It was not a data point. It was a connection. The next cycle, the day of their departure, arrived. The Apex had gathered on the bridge for their final observations. Xylos stood before Captain Vance. "Our observation cycle is complete. We have gathered sufficient behavioral data. The Apex Collective will now render its final judgment on your species. You will remain here until you receive our transmission." It turned to leave. Vance took a deep breath. The seed of his plan had grown overnight, watered by the small, almost imperceptible changes he had seen in Xylos. The way it had held the mug, the way it sometimes seemed to linger just a little longer when observing a moment of human connection. He saw a flicker, not of emotion, but of something that could be its precursor: curiosity. "Observer," Vance said, his voice clear and firm, stopping the alien in its tracks. "Before you go, there's one more part of this vessel you haven't seen, the most important part. I'd like to show it to you. It might help with your final assessment." Xylos turned. "We have scanned every compartment of this vessel. There are no areas we have not observed." "You've scanned the spaces," Vance said with a small smile. "But you haven't seen the place. It's not on any schematic. It's where the soul of this ship lives. It's called the bilge bar." He led them off the bridge, not up but down, through a series of maintenance ladders and crawl spaces that were definitely not in the ship's official plans. They went deeper into the bowels of the Constance, past the main engineering deck, past the primary water reclamation tanks, into a part of the ship that was pure, unadulterated human. The corridors became tighter, the walls more stained, the air thicker with the smell of grease and something else, something older. Finally, they emerged into a small, spherical chamber that was clearly once an old emergency storage hold. This was the bilge bar. It was a masterpiece of human improvisation. The furniture was a collection of discarded acceleration couches, old cargo netting strung up as hammocks, and crates covered with scavenged fabric. The walls were covered, absolutely covered, in graffiti. Not malicious vandalism, but a living history of the Constance and its crew. There were names, dates, inside jokes scrawled in marker, silly drawings, and a surprisingly detailed mural of a dinosaur riding a spaceship. A string of the same blinking holiday lights from the mess hall were draped everywhere, casting a warm, multicolored glow. In the corner was a makeshift sound system, and a small, battered refrigerator hummed contentedly. The Apex stopped at the entrance, their sensors overwhelmed. The data was chaotic. There were countless organic residues from spilled drinks and snacks. The air was thick with the ghosts of 1,000 conversations, arguments, and laughter. The electromagnetic spectrum was a mess from the jury-rigged wiring. It was the absolute opposite of Apex order. The entire off-duty crew was already there, sitting in the mismatched furniture. They looked up as the Apex entered, their fear now mixed with a strange, defiant curiosity. Jared was holding a guitar. Lena was sitting next to him, a small smile on her face. Captain Vance gestured for the Apex to enter. "This, observer, is where we aren't being observed. This is where we are just us. This is where we remind ourselves that we're more than just cogs in a machine." Xylos and its two companions stepped cautiously into the room. The crew shifted, making space for them on a long, low crate that had been turned into a bench. The Apex sat, their long, elegant frames looking utterly alien in the cramped, messy space. The silence was heavy for a moment. Then, Jared strummed his guitar. He started playing a slow, simple melody, a folk song about a miner who struck it rich and then lost it all on a woman who didn't love him. His voice was rough, but it was full of feeling. Lena started to hum along. One by one, other crew members joined in, some singing the words, others just tapping their feet. They sang about love and loss, about hard work and bad luck, about dreams of Earth and the beauty of the stars. The Apex watched, their internal processors struggling to keep up. This was not a coordinated ritual. It was spontaneous, messy, and deeply emotional. The humans were sharing their vulnerabilities, their stories, their pain and joy, through a sequence of vibrating air molecules. They were creating something beautiful from nothing but emotion and memory. When the song ended, there was a moment of quiet. Then Finn, the other engineer, got up and went to the small refrigerator. He pulled out a bottle of amber liquid and a collection of dirty shot glasses. "It's not synth ale," he said, his voice a little gruff. "It's the real stuff, Jake's homemade whiskey. He was our still master, got reassigned last year." He poured a shot for each of the humans and then, after a hesitation, poured 3 more and slid them across the crate towards the apex. Xylos looked at the glass. The liquid was potent, a cocktail of complex organic compounds designed to alter human consciousness. It was, by all logical measures, a poison. The captain picked up his glass. The rest of the crew did the same. Vance looked at Xylos. "Observer, a toast. To understanding. May we find more of it in the stars." He threw back his shot, wincing slightly as the whiskey burned its way down. The rest of the crew did the same, some with similar winces, others with practiced ease. All eyes fell on the apex. Xylos looked at the 2 observers beside it. They had no protocol for this. With a grace that was almost imperceptible, Xylos reached out and picked up the tiny glass. It brought it close to where a mouth would be on a human, and its sensors analyzed the fumes. It was pungent. It raised the glass in a gesture mimicking the captain's, and then, in a single swift motion, poured the liquid past the smooth plate of its face. There was no mouth, but the whiskey simply vanished, absorbed or displaced by some unknown technology. The 2 other apex did the same. A profound silence filled the bilge bar. Then, a strange sound emanated from Xylos. It was a low, rumbling vibration, unlike its usual mind speech. It took a moment for the humans to realize what it was. It was a laugh. A deep, rusty, utterly alien sound that was unmistakably an expression of amusement. The other 2 apex joined in, their vibrations harmonizing in a way that was both beautiful and bizarre. The humans stared in stunned disbelief. Then, Jared let out a whoop of laughter, and the spell was broken. The bilge bar filled with the sound of pure, unadulterated human joy, mixed with the rumbling vibrations of the apex. They didn't understand the whiskey. They didn't understand the songs. But in that moment, surrounded by the chaotic warmth of humanity, they understood something far more important. They understood connection. Xylos stood up, its vibration laughter subsiding. It looked at Captain Vance, and for the first time there was something other than cold analysis in its presence. "Captain," it resonated, its internal voice softer, less commanding. "Our observations are complete. We have much to consider. We will take our leave." It and its 2 companions glided out of the bilge bar, through the crawl spaces, and back to the waiting airlock. The crew watched them go, a strange mixture of emotions washing over them. Fear was gone, replaced by a bewildered sense of hope. The Apex ship detached from the Constance and began its silent ascent back to the main fleet. The world, which had been watching the entire encounter through its spy satellites, was stunned into silence. What had just happened? What did it mean? Hours later, a transmission was received, not just by the Constance, but by every communication device on Earth. It was from the Apex Collective. The voice was the same cold, resonant vibration, but the words were different. Assessment of species Homo sapiens is complete. Initial data suggested a species of low technological merit and high emotional volatility. Further observation has revealed a critical variable previously unaccounted for by the collective's analytical matrix. The species possesses a unique and powerful trait, the ability to create value, meaning, and cohesion from chaos. They transform the illogical and the emotional into a binding force that strengthens the collective unit. This trait, which we have designated as the hearth factor, is not a weakness, but a profound and unquantifiable strength. Judgment. Species Homo sapiens is not a threat. It is an anomaly. Its potential is immeasurable. The Apex Collective will establish diplomatic relations. We have much to learn from each other. The transmission ended. The Apex fleet, all 17 ships, powered up their drives and, without another word, departed from the solar system as silently and swiftly as they had arrived. They left behind a world in shock, a world that had just been judged and found fascinating. On board the Constance, the crew sat in the bilge bar, the news sinking in. Jared picked up his guitar and started strumming a new, jauntier tune. Lena was laughing at the same time. Finn was already trying to figure out how to get the recipe for the whiskey to the Apex for their next visit. Captain Elias Vance sat in his worn-out chair on the bridge, a slow, genuine smile spreading across his weathered face. He looked at the empty space where the alien armada had hung like a sword of Damocles. He picked up his best captain ever mug, took a sip of cold coffee, and chuckled to himself. The most powerful fleet in the galaxy had come to judge humanity. They had scanned their weapons, analyzed their technology, and found it all wanting. But they had not accounted for the one thing that made humanity truly dangerous. They had not accounted for the human heart. They had come to judge, and they had left having learned the meaning of a toast, the beauty of a sad song, and the warmth of a homemade light in the dark. The Constance, an old, battered mining hauler, had done what no warship could. It had welcomed the judges in and sent them home as friends. The alien flagship had boarded a human vessel, and it was never seen again, not as a threat, but as a ghost of a past that no longer existed, replaced by a future no one could have predicted.